Strange Tales Told by a Dubliner by Turlough Con me. Story number 5. Queen of Broken Dreams. When my sister Linda and her husband Pat bought a house on Montpelier Parade in South County Dublin, I was very interested to visit and see what they were doing. It was what would now be called a fixer-upper. The terrace of Regency townhouses, Montpellier Parade, was built sometime in the early 19th century, and the one they bought at the end of the terrace had been added on to the others in 1829. From the outside it certainly looked grand, or what the Dublin people used to call a relic of old decency. It had stone steps up to the door, and a stately doorway it was. There were 3 main stories, as could be seen from the rows of windows, and a basement below stairs, which also had windows. When you entered the front door, there was a short hallway, and then a rather grand staircase with carpeted steps going up to the first floor. Upstairs, there were landings and other flights of stairs going up to the top of the house. These were townhouses, so they were tall and narrow. It was hard to tell the number of rooms at a glance, for they were built compactly on each floor. It certainly was a disaster of a house on the inside, needing repair and renovation almost everywhere. I just had to shake my head in bewilderment as the cheery young couple showed me round. It was obvious that there were years of work to do there. After they'd been living on Montpellier Parade for a while, the neighbours told Linda that the house was haunted. Now, Linda and family set little store by anything supernatural. It'd been anathema to their cheery, practical nature. But one day, Linda told me the story when I was visiting. It was in the bathroom on the first floor, where she was showing me some new fixtures they had put in. What is more, it had been the scene of a suicide. The house at the time was owned by a Miss Carroll, a spinster who worked at the Irish Hospital sweepstakes. This was a big operation in them days, and she had, I suppose, some sort of an administrative job there. On the day she retired in 1948, the management and staff held a sort of after-work party for her. She was there for a few hours, graciously accepting from all their good wishes for her retirement. Then she went home. She took her 2 little dogs into this room, the kitchen, closed the windows and locked the door. Then she turned on the gas. Now, in them days, the gas that was piped into domestic gas cookers was very lethal, and it was a popular way to commit suicide. After a few minutes' exposure to the gas emanating from the unlit burners, no doubt Miss Carroll and the 2 little dogs were no longer breathing. Linda didn't know the rest of the story, how the dead woman was found, how long it took to discover her, and so on. I couldn't help feeling shocked and uneasy hearing this story. It showed that Miss Carroll had had an iron resolve, keeping up the mask all through that farewell party and then going home and killing herself. I suppose she estimated that no one would be found to look after the 2 little dogs that were all she had in the world, so she took them with her into eternity. Aye, she must have been a woman of iron in a way, and very cold and calculating too, taking her secret with her, leaving no note, it seems. I suppose she thought that there was no one left for her to talk to. Then again, she must have been terribly rigid, the kind of person who sees no alternative to situations they encounter in life. She obviously couldn't stand the idea of growing old alone, with a pension but nothing to do in this house. She must have taken an inventory of friends and relatives and decided that none could be relied on to help. She must have had no religious faith that would make her shrink from self-destruction. She must have felt absolutely alone in time and eternity. As for the two little dogs, it was hardly fair to take them with her, what with them having no say in the matter. But at least she would have animal company in the next world, like an Egyptian pharaoh whose favourite horses were slaughtered at his funeral. But in the end, what she must have wanted and believed in was absolute numbness, and she found a drastic way to achieve it in a matter of a few minutes. But then there was the matter of the haunting. The woman is supposed to haunt this house still, the neighbours say. Is that it? I asked. Aye, said Linda. Occupants who lived here before us all experienced her, it seems. Well, I asked, have you experienced anything so far? No, she said. Well, none of us believe in such stuff. Not even the kids. Still and all, we do often hear doors opening and closing up through the house when there's no one there. She shrugged her shoulders. It's just a draughty old house. As the years went by, things did not go well for the family in Montpellier, as we called it. There was some progress on the renovations, but never enough, and Pat's idea that he could do it all himself as a home handyman proved to be quite unrealistic. As a TV news cameraman, he was often on the road and away from home. Relations between the couple soured, and then they split up. It ended up with Pat moving out and finding a new partner elsewhere in Dublin, and Linda staying in Montpellier with the 3 kids. Now, Linda was not practically inclined at all, not into house renovations. She was a busy journalist by this time. Her interest went as far as wanting the house to look like one of them houses on the covers of glossy magazines. But that was it. It became clear to all, herself included eventually, that Montpellier was never going to be renovated. It was going to stay a stately ruin of sorts, with a few rooms refurbished in an attractive style, but with a leaky roof and a below stairs that looked like a disused storage space in a factory. When I was back in Dublin in 1996, Linda and the kids, who are now just about grown, went away for a 3-week holiday in the Canaries, and she asked me to come over and stay in the house in her absence. This I readily agreed to, as I was still at a fairly loose end. It takes a while to get used to an old house, with its creaking and cracks and noises of all sorts. I had stayed there before, but now it was different. I was alone there. I really had to experience the house for what it was. It had been a fine old Regency house, no doubt home to some well-to-do Anglo-Irish family, with servants to see to their every need. I recalled the romance of the place, as I had felt it when Linda and the family had just moved in. I was only a young lad then. It had been no trouble to me imagination to think of musicians clad in powdered wigs, knee breeches and silk stockings, playing chamber music in the living room in front of a roaring fire. Now, on the other hand, as a mature man, a returned emigrant who had knocked about the world, I could see the painful reality of it. It was the palace of unfulfilled dreams. Run down and dilapidated as it was, it seemed to tell the visitor that it would always be so, and it would mock the dreams of the young couple and family who had acquired it, until such time as they all left and others could have a go. The idea was not far from me mind that the house resisted dreams, resisted plans for it. It wanted to remain as it was. Soon enough, I noticed the noises Linda had talked about. I'd be alone in the house, and a door would close somewhere upstairs that must have been open. Or a door would open creaking. And perhaps a draught would be felt coming down the stairs. The first few times I ignored it. I was quite versed in all the standard explanations for odd sounds in an old house. The wood was working. It creaked or thumped or groaned to itself. Draughts came from unsuspected places, from windows left open or poorly sealed. Doors left ajar were apt to close, and doors not properly shut were apt to fly open. I believed these explanations as a matter of course, but somehow they weren't enough for me after a while. Then I started to go and check on it whenever it happened. The result was always the same. I found nothing. Then one day I was going upstairs to the next floor when I fancied I heard footsteps on the stair above. I quickened me pace, reached the first floor landing, and looked up to the second flight of stairs and then the third. There seemed to be a shadow moving there. But a door up there was open, and the space was lit up by the sunlight, so that I could not be sure. The shadow, if such it was, seemed to pass through the open doorway, and then the door swung slowly shut, leaving the upper floor in semi-darkness. I stood for a long time on the second floor landing, debating within myself what to do. Eventually, with a sudden resolution, I walked as quietly as I could up the carpeted stairs to the next floor. I now stood before the door that had closed, seemingly of itself. I grasped the old-fashioned door handle, turned it, and opened the door. I didn't walk in, as if I half feared someone was waiting to do me harm. But no, there was nothing. It was just an empty room, with some furniture and with motes floating about in the afternoon sunlight. I caught a whiff of something familiar and long forgotten. It was cigarette smoke. But there was no smoker to see here. I walked in, paced around the room, and confirmed that there was no one there. And there was no possible exit other than the door I'd come through and the window, which was shut. I advanced to the window and looked out. It was the top floor, and it was high up, and I felt almost dizzy looking so far down at the neglected back garden and the old crumbling mews leading to the back lane. Feeling like a fool, I turned and went out of the room. I walked downstairs to the living room, where a fire of coal and turf was burning in the grate. I sat down with a book and tried to think of other things. Soon I succeeded. That night, though, I found it hard to sleep. My ears were straining to hear any noises that might be happening in the house. From my room on the second floor, I heard nothing, though. Still, I had a rather rough night, punctuated by disquieting dreams that I forgot as soon as I woke up in the morning. I was out during the day, and when I came home, it was almost dark. I found the key to the front door in my coat pocket and let myself in. Standing in the hallway, I stopped and let my eyes stray up the grand carpeted staircase to the upper floor. I could swear that there was someone standing there, right at the top of the stairs, a woman in a rather old-fashioned dress, looking down at me. Perhaps she was coming down the stairs and had stopped in surprise when I came in. Or perhaps she had heard the key in the lock and had come out of the bathroom up there, the old kitchen as I remembered, to look down from the top of the stairs and see who it might be. I looked up at her. She was perfectly still and silent. There was just the faintest look of surprise on her composed features. I opened me mouth to speak, but me tongue and throat were much too dry to bring forth so much as a sound. Yet it was as if I had looked up and said, "I'm home," and she had said, "But who are you?" As I stood there, she faded away into the twilight. The next night, I had made a grand fire of coal and turf in the living room, and was sitting there reading a book after dinner by the standard lamp nearby. The whole thing made me very drowsy, and I soon switched off the lamp and sat in the semi-darkness. The fire in the grate made quite a blaze, illuminating the whole area round the hearth and sending flickering shadows into the darkest corners of the large room. I took to making pictures in the fire, as I had always done since a boy. A burning city, perhaps, or the depths of hell and the torments of the damned. I fell asleep in the comfortable old armchair. Then I awoke feeling I was not alone. There was that familiar smell of cigarette smoke again. I could just distinguish it from the smell of the burning turf. I stared into the brightly blazing fire once more. Then my eyes strayed to the armchair on the other side of the hearth. There was a woman sitting there, looking at me. A woman of middle age, wearing a patterned wool dress of understated elegance, with pale stockings and black court shoes, and with her hair done in an old-fashioned perm that made me think of the swing era. Her hair was grey. As I looked at the motionless figure, she seemed to flicker like an image in an old silent film. She was looking at me with a mixture of apprehension and daring. I looked at her, intending to speak, intending to ask who she was and what she was doing there. But the weight of slumber was too heavy upon me. I fell asleep again. I awoke a second time and exchanged glances with the woman, struggling to emerge from sleep and speak to her. But sleep was stronger than me will. When I awoke again after midnight, I looked across and the woman was gone. Knowing I wouldn't find her anywhere in the house, I stumbled off to bed and slept until after dawn. The night after that, after a busy day in town and a dinner I'd cooked myself at home, I again fell asleep in my armchair by the fire in the living room. Again I awoke, feeling I was watched, and there was the same woman sitting in the armchair opposite. Again the urge to speak to her, question her, elicit talk from her, and the failure to do so numbed me sleep. I awoke again, or was I dreaming? And there she was looking at me attentively. "You," I said heavily, "no business being here. You have to go." "Why should I go?" she said quietly. "And this my house." "Your house indeed," I said again. "What is it you want anyway?" "Nothing, except to sit by the hearth. I had the feeling you called me, that you wanted to know something. Is that it?" I was gradually becoming more awake now, and turned fully to meet her gaze. She had quiet grey eyes, but her look was unflinching, as if no misfortune could discomfit her. "So how is this your house?" I asked. "How do you come to be here?" "I am the queen of broken dreams. This is the house of broken dreams. I cannot be quit of it." "You certainly left your mark on it by killing yourself. That does leave a mark on a place, I don't mind telling you." "I'm sure it was just another chapter in a history of disappointments and bad endings," she said. "Why did you do it?" "To take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing, end them," she said. "Was there no hope?" None at all, she said lightly. I could only look back on my life, and it was a woman's life. At the beginning, I had to choose between marriage and work. They wouldn't let me do both. Oh no, that was reserved for men. I stood at the parting of the ways for a long time. I was a young woman, and there was a young man, and I was waiting for him to sweep me off my feet. He was a young man full of dreams and ambitions, like you are. But he was weak, and he waited too long. Faint heart never won fair lady, she said with a bitter laugh. So I made my choice and kept on working, she went on after a while. A respectable spinster and a property owner, thanks to an inheritance. My father died young. A spinster, barren, unloved. And at the end of it came superannuation, which is the antechamber of death, especially for one like me. I had spent my life working, taking care to avoid the steps that would have put an end to that precious work, and in the end I lost it all anyway. All the people I had worked with and for, they all came up to me on the last day and said nice things to me. And I knew that none of them would think of me afterwards. I would be forgotten. Relatives, I had none. Friends? How can a spinster make friends? Men cannot come near you, and women are married and their lives exclude you because you're not like them. No, she said, looking away, I found myself suddenly on the edge of a precipice. The choice was to stay there and wither away, or to jump into the abyss. I jumped. Did you not shrink from that step? I asked. Did you not fear damnation on the other side? Of course I shrank from it, but the voices warning of eternal damnation had long ceased to matter in my mind. I knew I was entirely alone in this world. Why not in the next? It was up to me to make my own decision, as I always had done. It's best not to think too much. Just steel yourself and jump. But you see, you've escaped nothing. What do you mean? Sooner or later, people have to realise the illusions they had about themselves and about life in general, and cast them from them. Some people do it when they're old, before they die. Some people don't do it till after they die. To give it its traditional name, it's called purgatory. It's a step you can't skip. That's why you're here, in this house. Do you presume to lecture me? She demanded. You, one who has not passed from life to death. It is an unknown country, a place you do not know. Pardon me, dear lady, I said with a sigh. You have more experience of life than I have, not to mention death. I'm not in a position to lecture you. Well then, she said with an impatient toss of her head, I just want to tell you that I, even at my age, middle age that is, am coming to the edge of purgatory. I can already feel the flames under me feet. All I'm saying is that none of us can escape it, the gradual death of our illusions. It seems to me that life and death are seamless. Things like that have to be done and gone through. It doesn't matter if on this side or on that side. You talk so glibly about illusions, she snapped, but you cannot know what they really are. They go deep, to the very core of you, and when they're gone, there's not much of you left. You're standing on the precipice. Very well, I said. I bow to your greater experience. Listen to me, said Miss Carroll with a new air of energy. If you want to know about illusions, I am the one to reveal to you more than you can bear. As I said to you, I am the queen of broken dreams, and this is my palace. When you have learned what I have to teach you, there will be no room left for highfalutin talk and philosophizing. I will show you the place where all the illusions go and the bits of broken dreams. Look in that place, and then tell me if life is worth living. Your life, that is. I made my decision about my life a long time ago. She rose from her armchair, and I saw her walk briskly to the door. There was a commotion at her feet. Yes, there were the two little dogs, two Pekingese, obediently following her. She opened the door, and all went out. I felt too weary to pursue Miss Carroll, or to do anything else for that matter. Sleep reclaimed me by the fireside. That night, when I was in bed, I awoke to hear the faint sound of piano music. It must have been 3 o'clock in the morning, and all the world was quiet. I knew there was an old upright piano in a room next to the living room on the ground floor, but I thought to myself that it must be someone in the house next door playing. It was quite conceivable that the sound carried through the walls. I could pick out the tune, but I couldn't name it. The next morning, on waking, I realised what it was. It was the middle section of Chopin's funeral march. It had seemed to fill the house with sadness. It had been slow and inexorable. You can't rush a funeral march. That was how the unseen player had played it. But who could the player be? By the time I had my morning coffee, I was prepared to dismiss the whole thing as a dream of the night. The following evening after dinner, I was sitting in the living room at the fire, reading a book, and as was me wont, I fell asleep. I was awakened by the sound of piano music. It could only be in the house, quite close in fact. I got to my feet and walked unsteadily out of the living room into the hall. The sound was coming from the back parlour, all right, where the old piano was. I went down the hall and listened. It was Chopin's funeral march. I turned the handle and the door opened noiselessly. I looked in. Miss Carroll sat at the piano with her back to me, playing the keyboard and working the pedals. She was not a bad player at all. She kept the stately rhythm. She was in no hurry to finish. Drawn in by the music, I went and stood behind her. I saw her permed grey hairdo and the back of her woolen dress. I shrank from touching her. Eventually she finished. Then she turned on the stool and looked up at me, as if she'd known I was there all along. Our eyes met. We seemed to scowl at one another. She stood up. The two dogs arose and gathered at her feet, for they too had been there, listening to the music stoically. "Come and see where dreams end," she said with a bitter smile. She walked past me to the bottom of the stairway. "Come," she said. We walked slowly up the wide carpeted stairs. The dogs shuffled obediently after her. "The 13 steps to the gallows," she said without looking at me. "It is good to have company on this walk. It's a long walk." At the top of the first flight of stairs, she turned left on the landing. I followed her like a sleepwalker. She was going into the bathroom, but the door was open. There was some light coming in from the street, and I could faintly hear the swish of traffic on Monkstown Road. It was raining. She turned to look at me. There was a terrible earnest look on her face now, so much so that her face seemed almost contorted with grief. "This is where it all ends," she said. "It is a consummation devoutly to be wished." We stood looking at one another, in silence. I began to hear a hissing sound in the room, at first faint, then growing louder and more distinct. The dogs at her feet whimpered. She kept looking at me. Her eyes had an inquiring look now, as if she wanted to see how I would react. I felt dizzy. Then I felt nausea. Still the hissing sound. Still the whimpering dogs. Still the fixed look. Whether it was the feeling of sudden illness I was having, or what I read in her eyes, I couldn't hold her gaze. "So what will it be?" I heard her ask softly. Her voice seemed to come from a great distance. "Join me here, or go back to your world of self-indulgent illusions and dreams that will never come to pass?" I opened my mouth to speak, but could scarcely bring forth the words. I had to shout, "I'll stay!" With what seemed to me like a supreme effort of will, I wrenched myself away from the place. Thank God the door was open. I staggered out onto the landing and then stumbled down the stairs. With difficulty, I found the latch and pulled open the front door. I stood for a while on the stone steps leading down into Montpellier Parade, breathing deeply. The fresh air tasted good. A breeze ran through the trees across the street. The stars shone overhead, as they always had. I didn't sleep much that night. When Linda and the family came back from their holiday in the sun, she asked, "How did it go here? Everything all right?" I looked at her for a long time. "Sell this house," I said. "Sell it while you can. It has won. You can't beat it. Make a fresh start somewhere else." Linda didn't seem all that surprised. "Maybe you're right," she said with a sigh. "I've been thinking about it, I may tell you. You know, somehow it didn't feel great coming home this time. I mean, coming here. Coming to Montpellier Parade." You've been listening to Queen of Broken Dreams by Turlough Conmee from Strange Tales Told by a Dubliner. If you've enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, share and comment, and the best of luck to yous.